What if I told you that some of the oldest Western European blood was never buried in the West at all? It's not in France or Spain or the windswept caves of Basque Country. No, it's clinging to life in a place no one expected. High above the world, where clouds scrape the Carpathian peaks and wolves still roam, lives a forgotten tribe. Wood carvers, horse breeders, folk singers, known to the world as Hutsuls. Culturally, they are Slavic, unmistakably. They speak a mountain dialect of Ukrainian. They wear embroidered vests, celebrate pagan Christian hybrids, and herd ponies along trails no map bothers to chart. But beneath the songs and symbols, something strange stirs in their cells. Scientists tested their mitochondrial DNA, the mother's line, passed unbroken like a secret through centuries. What they found stunned even them. Haplogroup H1, a genetic signature born in the caves of Western Europe, carried by the Ice Age hunters who repopulate a thawing world. In Spain's Basques, it peaks. In the Hutsuls, it matches. 18.4%. Nearly identical. But the Basques never crossed the Carpathians. The Hutsuls never crossed the Pyrenees. So how? How does a remote tribe on the eastern edge of Europe carry the deepest Western lineage on the continent? Is this the echo of a forgotten migration? A lost mother line sheltered through millennia of blizzards, wars, and border shifts? Or is it proof of something older? A people not descended from refugees, but the guardians of an Ice Age refuge itself? If the answers lie anywhere, they lie not in libraries, but in the fog and stone and blood of a people too isolated to blend and too stubborn to forget. But to uncover that answer, we must go where few genetic maps ever go, into the forgotten folds of the Carpathians. They weren't meant to survive. When the Mongol horde came, fire on horseback, swallowing cities in days, most ran and vanished. But a few didn't just run. They climbed into forests so dense the sun forgets to shine, into ridges so steep even sound gets lost. They didn't leave maps. They left whispers of a people who melted into the Carpathians like smoke into pine. Today we call them Hutsuls. But even the name is an argument. Some say it means nomad. Others, bandit. There's a version that says it came from a horse, a mountain pony, stubborn and wild, just like them. But maybe it was never about meaning. Maybe the names survived the same way they did, by hiding just enough. Up here, life doesn't move in centuries. It moves in winters. Generations that learn to stitch warmth into linen, to turn bark into music, to breed animals with a memory of cliffs in their bones. No kings ruled here. No cities drained them. They built a civilization out of exile. Every carving in wood, every embroidered sleeve, every word of their jagged dialect speaks of a people who never begged for permission to exist. Serfdom passed them by. So did the census, the empire, the school bell. But that isolation, that stubborn, aching beauty, came with a cost. Because while the world forgot them, their genes remembered everything. For centuries, the Hutsuls danced on the edge of extinction and preservation. A culture so cut off, so untouched, it fossilized something ancient in real time. But what if that isolation didn't just protect their stories? What if it preserved something far deeper? Something hidden, not in legends, but in blood? What happens when this cultural island gets its DNA tested? It shouldn't be there. Haplogroup H1, the genetic whisper of Paleolithic Spain, belongs in the caves of Cantabria, not in the lungs of a shepherd calling across Carpathian ridges. And yet it is. 18.4%. In Hutsuls. Let that number sink in. That's not just high for Eastern Europe, it's higher than most of it. Nearly matching the Basques, who've guarded their bloodline like stone since the glaciers pulled back. But the Hutsuls aren't Basques. They don't speak Euskara. They speak a raw, Slavic dialect, sharpened by mountain wind and the silence of isolation. They don't live in valleys soaked with Atlantic fog. They ride ponies across frost-hardened trails, their songs echoing through pine and snow. Their ancestors were refugees, not cave dwellers. And still, H1 pulses through their veins. Not diluted, not faint, but bold, alive, stubborn. Scientists called it an anomaly. Statistical models scrambled to explain it. Founder effect, genetic drift, chance. But this isn't drift. Drift doesn't push a Western European lineage up a 1,500-meter ridge in eastern Ukraine and keep it there for thousands of years. Drift doesn't survive war, famine, empire, silence. This is a thread, ancient, deliberate, woven into a people who had no idea what they were carrying. It means the past didn't just survive, it hid. Inside lullabies and ponies, inside trumpetas and wedding patterns, inside mothers who passed a code from one generation to the next without ever knowing the world it came from. And now, we face a riddle no one expected. A people shaped by Slavic exile, bearing the maternal code of Western Ice Age survivors. Not a myth, not a mistake, a map, in blood. So how did a Western European lineage climb east into these peaks? The last time Europe froze over, it didn't just kill, it erased. Glaciers came like giants, swallowing forests, drowning valleys, turning rivers to stone. The humans who stayed behind didn't survive, except a few. Science long believed they ran west to Spain, to the Franco-Cantabrian caves, to warmth and mammoth hides in Flint. That was the story. One path, one refuge, one rebirth. But now, something cracks that certainty. In the shadows of Ukraine's Carpathians, a second ember burns. The Hutsuls. Their mitochondrial DNA doesn't just resemble the Western survivors, it matches them. Too closely. Too perfectly. Not as an echo, but as a sibling. Which means they didn't arrive after the ice. They endured it. Picture it, snow 40 feet deep, wind screaming like wolves, and a handful of humans, tucked into alpine crevices, clinging to heat, to blood, to memory. This wasn't a stop on the migration route. This was a cradle. A forgotten nursery of Europe, tucked between cliffs and silence. And the Hutsuls? They didn't walk into the mountains later. They were born in them. Every gene, every carving, every bone fiddle that sings through those woods, it all comes from something older than history, older than language. A people who didn't just survive the end of the world, they waded through it. Which means the Carpathians were never just an obstacle on the map. They were a sanctuary, a bunker of bloodlines. And if the Hutsuls sheltered there, if their ancestors kindled fire under glaciers, if these mountains guarded a piece of Europe the textbooks forgot, then one question rises, slow, impossible, urgent. If the Carpathians were a refuge, who else sheltered there? On the surface, they look Slavic. Language, clothing, rituals, even the names etched into wooden crosses. But under the surface, something bends. A fracture, a pull from the south. Because when geneticists tested the Hutsul men of Bukovina, expecting the usual Slavic signature, R1A, the marker of Eastern bloodlines, they found something strange. I2A, not just present, dominant, the same Y-DNA found in Balkan shepherds, in Moldavian hills, in deep Romanian valleys. It's not what they expected in the heart of the Ukrainian highlands. Not this Balkan core, inside a Slavic shell. And yet, the mountains explain everything. And nothing. The Carpathians didn't just cradle life. They sealed it. North to south, they blocked gene flow like a gate of stone. Ideas pass. Armies pass. But genes, they get trapped. One ridge can mean silence for centuries. So maybe that's what happened here. Romanized shepherds, the Vlachs, slipping through narrow passes, settling deep into alpine folds, marrying silence more than strangers. Their Latin words dissolved into dialects. Their customs folded into mountain rituals. Their blood stayed. Even now, echoes linger. A carved pattern that mirrors Balkan folk art. A tune, familiar in Transylvania, but sung in Hutsul. Bits of Latin in a Slavic tongue. The shell says one thing, but the core tells another story. A hidden Balkan thread, inside a people no one thought to question, which raises a deeper contradiction. If the Hutsuls carry this southern signal, how far does it reach? What else have these mountains concealed? Because if Bukovina holds this surprise, what happens when we compare them to their nearest neighbors? They look like brothers. The Lemkos, the Boykos, the Hutsuls. Same carved wooden homes, same woven belts, same tremata horns echoing across the ridgelines. To the outside world, they're one people, splinters of the same Carpathian soul. But then the DNA speaks, and the story splits. Researchers expected overlap, maybe subtle variation. Instead, they found chasms. On the genetic map, something breaks wide open. The Boykos, believed to be close cousins to the Hutsuls, aren't even nearby. In fact, their DNA drifts shockingly close to Udmurts, a Finno-Ugric group from the distant Urals. Lemkos, too, wander off the chart. Their maternal lineages spike with traits rarely seen outside isolated mountain pockets, like Haplogroup I, and a strange echo of East. Only the Hutsuls remain tethered, but even they float apart. The PCA plots, cold, mathematical, undeniable, show what folklore couldn't. The Carpathians weren't a single cradle. They were a mosaic, a collision zone of exiles, shepherds, and forgotten tribes, each cut off by peaks and passes, each carrying a different ancestral secret. The irony is cruel. The cultures are near identical. The dialects blend. They dance the same steps, marry across villages, bury their dead under the same twisted pines. But in their blood, they are strangers. And if you can't trust geography, if shared songs and surnames don't guarantee shared ancestors, then what does? What if identity isn't what we inherited? What if it's what we survived? Because deep in this tangle of mountain clans and frozen bloodlines, one group breaks every model. Imagine a lake, high in the mountains, untouched by rivers, unfed by streams. Still, silent. Its waters don't mix. They hold the cold. They hold the past. That is the Hutsul genome. Because when scientists mapped their DNA, they weren't just reading history. They were reading a memory that never got rewritten. A founder effect, they call it. When a small group, cornered by war, hunger, exile, becomes the seed of a new population, the few become the many. And whatever they carry in their blood stays. No dilution, no drift, just repetition, like a pattern carved into wood, passed down, hand to hand, generation to generation. And here, in the Carpathians, where mountains strangle migration, where winter locks the villages for months, repetition becomes law. The Hutsuls didn't blend. They didn't scatter. They stayed. And because of that, their genome became a time capsule. Inside it, fragments of maternal lineages extinct elsewhere in Europe. Subclades forgotten by history, preserved by snow and silence. In a world where most populations blur, they stayed sharp. Even their way of life reflects it. Their songs still use words no longer found in textbooks. Their crafts mimic landscapes lost to agriculture. Their ponies, short, sure-footed, carry the instinct of trails no road ever replaced. This isn't just tradition. It's biological memory. Their culture, their DNA. They're saying the same thing. We held on. And now, as Europe scrambles to understand its roots, the Hutsuls remain. Not as a relic, but as a reservoir. A frozen lake, still holding the echoes of Ice Age mothers, Balkan shepherds, Slavic exiles, all suspended in their cells. But what if this lake doesn't just reflect the past? What if their DNA doesn't just look backward, but also forward? It started with a whisper in the data, a handful of mutations, low frequency, easy to miss, until they weren't. Hidden in the autosomal fabric of the Hutsul genome, something began to glow. Not one mutation, but many. Rare, specific, carried quietly through generations, like smuggled heirlooms. These weren't just remnants of ancient migration. They were medical signals. Variants that could influence how cells respond to disease, how mitochondria burn energy, how bodies age, or fail to. In Ashkenazi studies, similar patterns led to breakthroughs. Tay-Sachs, BRCA, predictive genetics, precision medicine. Now scientists are asking, could the Hutsuls carry keys too? Keys to understanding resilience in extreme environments, to uncovering risk factors for rare conditions, to unlocking how certain traits survive isolation while others vanish. Because isolation doesn't just preserve culture, it preserves code, but it cuts both ways. What if that same seclusion, that same shield of snow and ritual, is also protecting risk? A mutation passed too many times in a closed circle can become a curse. The same mechanism that preserves a language, a song, a surname, can freeze a flaw into the genome. And now comes the question, do we sequence them all? Map every allele? Expose every buried gene to the light of research? Or do we leave them intact, a living archive of who they were, before modernity cracks it open? Science says intervene. Culture says protect. But what happens when medicine collides with myth? When the genome becomes a battleground for the soul of a people? Because if their DNA carries answers to tomorrow's diseases, and if isolation gave them both gifts and ghosts, then the future of the Hutsuls may no longer rest in the past. And what does this mean for their survival? In today's world, they were never meant to be symbols. Not saints. Not skeletons in a museum. Just people living, hurting, carving, singing, in a place the world forgot. And yet here they are, the Hutsuls, stewards of something far older than Ukraine, older than Slavs, older than language itself. Because when the Ice Age ended and Europe thawed into rivers and forests, someone had to carry the memory. Not in stone, in blood. Their mitochondrial lineage, H1, didn't just survive, it stayed, rooted like pine in frozen soil, while the rest of Europe changed faces, flags, gods. And everything else about them reflects that same ancient rhythm. The Hutsul pony, bred to climb vertical ice, haul silence through fog, is a creature of prehistory. Their trembetas, hollow horns stretched 3 meters long, echo across valleys like mammoth trumpets, not made for concerts, but for survival. Even their songs, layered in dissonant tones, tuned to mountain acoustics, don't sound Slavic. They sound glacial. And the dialect, it bends. Words bend. Syntax drifts. Fragments of forgotten tongues trapped like pollen in amber. This isn't nostalgia. This is a living fossil. A biome of culture and code, co-evolving for millennia in isolation. Every festival, every carved spoon, every embroidered cuff, it's not art. It's inheritance. So when we say the Hutsuls are Slavic, or Romanian, or Ukrainian, maybe that's too recent a frame. Maybe what they really are is a bloodline of Ice Age Europe that never melted. Not a lost people, but a people who remembered. The final whisper of a Europe we thought extinct. But if they've carried that memory this long, unchanged, untamed, then one question still chills the bone. But is their legacy now under threat? The past isn't gone. It's fleeing again. Sirens now echo through the valleys, where trembetas, once called weddings to the ridge. Roads once carved for ponies now rumble with tanks. Families who've lived in the same wooden homes for generations vanish overnight into the fog. Ukraine is burning. And in the farthest corners, where maps blur into mist, where the Carpathians once shielded exiles from Mongol hooves, the Hutsuls remain. Not untouched, but unchanged. Even now, as war shatters cities below, they do what their ancestors did 800 years ago, offer shelter, take in strangers, share bread, warmth, silence, a refuge once more. But the threat today doesn't ride a horse. It moves through pixels, algorithms, concrete. Modernity erodes slower, but deeper. Children leave for Kiev. Crafts lose meaning. The dialect phrase. The bloodline thins. And yet, pieces survive. In the diaspora, a church basement in Toronto holds a festival with hand-stitched kilims older than the country it's in. In Manchester, a choir of second-generation Hutsuls sings in a language they don't fully understand, but refuse to let die. The DNA travels differently now. Not through migration, through memory, through symbols, patterns. A carved belt buckle passed from grandfather to boy. A recipe recited from heart. Cultural genes, not written in cells, but in choices. And every choice made to stay, to teach, to weave, to remember is resistance. Because somewhere in that resistance is a truth we haven't yet faced. The Hutsuls weren't just carriers of ancient DNA. They were protectors of it. And if they disappear, so might our clearest window into who we were. Which means the question isn't just about their survival. It's about ours. Because one question still burns, beneath ash, beneath anthem, beneath blood. What if we've misunderstood Europe's origin story? Maps lie. Not in ink, but in silence. For decades, every textbook said the same thing. That after the Ice Age, Europe was reborn from the West, from the caves of Spain, from the fires of the Franco-Cantabrian refuge. One direction, one origin, one story. But the Hutsuls don't fit. They speak a Slavic tongue. Live in Eastern Europe. Isolated, yes, but genetically, they should have aligned with their neighbors. They don't. Instead, they carry H1, the maternal echo of the oldest Western Europeans, in numbers too high for chance, too sharp for drift, too ancient for any recent migration, which means something impossible may be true. Europe didn't repopulate in one wave. It flickered back into life in pockets. Multiple fires lit in different refuges, and one of them burned right here, in the Carpathians. For thousands of years, no one looked. No one thought to. The mountains were too remote, the people too few, too folkloric, too forgotten. But their DNA, it remembered. It waited. And when we finally asked, it broke the map. It told a new origin story, one where survival isn't westward, one where the keepers of the oldest lineages never left. And now, as we stand at the edge of science and myth, culture and code, the Hutsuls offer something rare, not proof, perspective, that the oldest Europeans may not be buried under museums. They might be walking, quiet, through the snow-dusted forests of Ukraine. Maybe the most ancient Europeans were never gone, just forgotten in the fog of these mountains. And if that's true, what happens when we test the DNA of the Boykos?